Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for Craftworld I'm Brent, and in this video I will be talking about the new rules for Craftworld Altansar, which appeared in White Dwarf 473 in a special Index Xenos supplement. Now, before I talk about the competitive viability of Altansar on the table, or how I think they might be most effectively used in a 9th edition roster, I would just like to acknowledge how exciting it is to see GW giving this sort of attention to one of the minor craft worlds. I literally can't remember the last time a new craft world appeared on the scene with its own rules. I would have to Google that, and I haven't done it. It's great. Also, just from a lore perspective, it must be very exciting for Altansar players to be getting additional lore. There are 8 pages of lore in here, and my own Craftworld Ibersol has a total of 6 sentences, so that's exciting. Now, that said, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. I think that one of the reasons the GW has probably hesitated to do this in the past is simply that players who gravitate towards minor subfactions that have neither much lore nor many rules probably do it partially for that reason. It's fun to be able to project onto your minor craft world your own narrative, and it's fun to be able to use a variety of rules when you put them on the table, either because you like to experiment with different play styles. So maybe in one game you use Footsteps of the Ancients and your craft world Ibersol are using Ulthway rules, and maybe then they're using Farflung Craftworld rules, and you can do that. And so I do think, to be fair to GW, I don't think it's just neglect. I think maybe it's also respect for the reasons that players gravitate towards these options to begin with. That said, it's always fun to see the faction grow, to see craft worlds further developed, and so that's pretty exciting. And GW, to be fair, they've worked around, I think, those concerns in an interesting way on the front end, and that is that although there are 8 pages of new lore, to be honest, it's really it's like 7 4/5 pages of an adventure story about Morgan Ra, in which we find out some things about Craftworld Altansar which really are not new, and then there are a few sentences at the end that actually really add to the identity of the craft world. Now, you may or may not remember that Altansar is the craft world that, after the Doom happened, initially was positioned right on the edge of the Eye of Terror, and figured that it was okay because it wasn't actually in that warp energy. But then, given the fluctuating nature of warp space, they suddenly found themselves caught in the pull of the Eye of Terror, being sucked into the warp. And eventually they are sucked into the warp and they're lost. And for thousands of years, they're presumed destroyed, like the thousands of planets and dozens of craft worlds that were destroyed when Slaanesh drew her first breath. And then, thousands of years later, Altansar is vomited out of the warp, and they announce that it's okay, we're all fine, we're fine here. How are you? Don't worry about the fact that we are wearing distinctly Slaaneshi colors now, and we'll never take our helmets off in your presence. Everything is fine. We're on your side. Slaanesh did not get us. It's good. We're just not taking my helmet off. And note my light pink armor. I liked, and they've added to that. Here's what's changed. Now it is no longer the case that Altansar Eldar never remove their helmets in the presence of other Eldari, merely that they almost never do. And when they do, they have a death-like visage. They look like elf flies in amber, the Walking Dead, resurrected space elf people. That's cool. And then we get an explanation for this, and we're told that this might be the explanation, but we're told that this might be the explanation in the same way that we're told that the first Striking Scorpion Phoenix Lord may or may not be Drazar. It is Drazar. Obviously, it is Drazar. So we know now. There's this warlock who went to Ulthway, who apparently revealed that the way that the Altansari survived was to make a deal with Yened, who shielded the ship, and now they've all pledged themselves to the god of death, and that's why they look very death-like, and they really are fighting against Slaanesh. I think it was more fun when we weren't sure, although I will also say that it's really not credible in the world of 40K that a craft world could come back, behave that way, refuse to remove its helmet, and like Eldred wouldn't have a couple of them abducted at some point. It's not like they never leave the craft world and have the helmets removed just to make sure, obviously. So this is more believable, but I think maybe a little bit less fun. I liked when we weren't sure whose side they were on. I thought that was neat. The rules. Let's talk about the rules. So Altansar got a subfaction bonus, which is frankly not good. It's a combination of two of the far-flung Craftworld traits. So here's the other thing. Even with no White Dwarf 473, you could have made Altansar with exactly the subfaction bonus that they got. So in that sense, they really didn't get anything. And the subfaction bonus that they have is one that no competitive player would ever in her right mind actually choose. If we were to give all of the far-flung Craftworld traits, remember you get two of these things, a rating from, say, A to D, and A is the best and D is bad. I would say that the first of these is a B and the second one is a C. And there are several options in the book that are A's. So the first one is the far-flung Craftworld trait where armor penetration is improved by 1 in the first turn of melee combat. Now, I already talked about in my Codex review why this is not as good as it initially appeared. There's a lot of really good Eldar melee units, but for the most part, they already have AP -4, and not a lot of stuff in the game has an armor save in melee that's better than a 3-up. That's not an invuln save. So it doesn't help your Howling Banshees. It doesn't help your Shining Spears. It doesn't help your Wraith Lords with the Ghost Glaive or any of your other big hard hitters. It slightly helps your Striking Scorpions, and Striking Scorpions are good now, so that's cool. And the real winners are probably Wraithguard with Wraith Cannons, which I think have 2 attacks now. Wraith Cannons can be fired in melee, and they have a high strength because they are ghost murder bots. But the limiting factor before for Wraithguard in melee was that they just didn't have any armor penetration. So the difference between 0 and 1 armor penetration is actually pretty significant most of the time statistically. So that's great. Now you're Wraithguard with cannons. They can shoot something, charge it, club it, fight on your opponent's turn, do some damage, then shoot it again, club it. That's great. So Altansar Wraith Cannons are a bit better than not Altansar Wraith Cannons. It also potentially could be helpful for something like units of Dire Avengers, or Exarch Warp Spiders, right? Both the Warp Spider Exarch and the Dire Avenger Exarch can be kitted out to be pretty good at melee. And so if you do get them into melee, now the rest of the squad, Aspect Warriors have 2 attacks now, is decent in melee. I guess it could help Storm Guardians, but Storm Guardians are still not worth using. So it's fine, right? The additional AP is not bad. There are definitely circumstances where it can make a difference and where it's a valuable tool. It's not as good as a lot of the other far-flung Craftworld options. And then the other bonus is each time a combat attrition test is taken for this unit, add 1 to the combat attrition test. So that means that if your squad is still above half strength and you fail a leadership roll, 1 runs away, but now you don't lose any other models. And if you're below half strength, instead of losing a model on a 1 or a 2, you'll only lose models on a 1. If I ever lost models to combat attrition, I might find this more attractive, but I personally find it almost never comes up. When I am making a leadership or morale test for a unit, if I've chosen not to use Insane Bravery, then generally I'm gambling. There's like 1 model left. Maybe it's a single Wraith infantry unit, or maybe it's an Exarch model, and I'm gambling on not like rolling a 6. So generally, if anything runs, it's the last model. I just don't see you using this a lot. I would maybe 1 in 5 games it saves a model. Maybe. I actually think that's generous. So in terms of the subfaction bonus, it's just not great. On the other hand, people out there, listen, this is amazing. One of the stratagems and one of the relics are fantastically good. So Altansar has this subpar subfaction ability that's actually nothing new. And in that sense, they haven't really been given anything. They're just locked into something that they probably would not have wanted anyway. But in exchange, they get a really powerful stratagem, a really powerful relic, and then some other warlord traits and stratagems that are pretty good and a couple that are okay. And so they really might have some play, despite the subfaction bonus. And I'll talk first about the stratagem that's really good and the relic that's really good to talk about why I think maybe it makes sense to be sold on this as an option for competitive play. So the stratagem that's really good is called Defiant to the Last. It costs 2 CP, and it allows a Craftworld player to give 1 Altansar unit objective secured until your next command phase. Now, yes, some of you are thinking, come on, Brent, Will of Azurian already does that. It sort of does that. It lets you do it to a core unit, and it lets you do it to a core unit that is within casting range of a Farseer, and it lets you do it to a core unit within casting range of a Farseer when you give up a psychic cast to do it and then succeed on that cast. Yes, that unit can also perform an action and still shoot, so there's another thing. But the ability to do this to any unit without giving up a cast, not being near a Farseer, that's not a core unit, is very, very powerful. So you could give this to a pretty inexpensive but quite durable for its points Viper jet bike, pop it onto an opponent's objective controlled by, say, 7 or 8 elite models that you normally couldn't get to, but that Viper jet bike is super fast, and strip your opponent of the objective. And this is likely to result in your opponent losing 4 points at the end of the game, maybe you gaining 4 points at the end of the game, and it could even result in your opponent losing 8 or you gaining 8, because remember, the way it usually works is you score 4 points for one objective, 8 points for 2, and 12 points if you control more than your opponent. So not only are you taking one away, but you could be shifting that balance in terms of who controls more. So if you use this successfully, even 2 turns a game, that's, I'm going to say, conservatively, maybe a 12-point swing in victory points. That's really good. That's really good in terms of what your opponent is losing and you're getting. That will change the outcome of a lot of close games. So in the hands of players who, when they build rosters and think about tactics, really are paying attention to scoring. So I think this is a high skill cap objective. This is really going to benefit players who are competitive players who are good at thinking about the nitty-gritty of the actual rules. It's not going to be as exciting to narrative and beer and pretzels players who are mostly focused on how they can kill as many of their opponent's models as possible, because that's really fun. The stratagems that tend to get the most love initially are the really sexy ones that significantly increase damage output or make something irritatingly durable. And this does neither, but in terms of actually playing the game, it's incredibly powerful. It's really, really good. Keep in mind, you could also use it on something like a Wave Serpent. Wave Serpents are really durable. How annoying would it be to your opponent if you use a Wave Serpent to vomit out some Banshees, right? They attack something, your Wave Serpent nips off, jumps on an objective. Maybe it even still has 5 or 6 Dire Avengers inside. So the Wave Serpent has OBSEC. And even if the Wave Serpent is destroyed, then the Dire Avengers inside that have the Exarch power that gives them OBSEC jump out. They still have OBSEC. It's so good. It's so good. The relic that's really powerful is something called the Savior Stone, and it does exactly the thing that I said in my Codex review video. The game designers had intentionally not given us anything that does, because it would potentially be too powerful. The Savior Stone, as long as the bearer is on the battlefield, allows you to add 1 or subtract 1 to the score on one of your strands of fate dice. Now, that might initially not sound super sexy, but what this means is for the results that exist on the die for 2 through 5, and there's a lot of good stuff there, each individual fate die that you roll has a 50% chance of yielding that result. So let's say you're counting on having a fate die let you auto succeed on a charge, right? Because what you're going to do is bring some Banshees in, say out of Deep Strike, and you're going to cast Ghost Walk on them. And so if you have a fate, you're coming in 9 inches from the enemy, you're adding +2. And if you can guarantee that one of your dice is a 6 and the other die is at least a 1, that's going to get them to a 9, you will charge. Now, you will succeed on your charge. That depends on you having a fate die that is a charge roll, and it depends on you succeeding on a pretty easy psychic power. If you can reduce the uncertainty of that by knowing that you will have the 6 for the charge, you can significantly increase your ability to lean into that tactic. Similarly with really needing the wound roll or the hit roll, that's a big deal. Now, the other thing that you could use this for, of course, is to improve your saving throw. And I think somebody at Goonhammer, they gave a rundown of how best to use Strands of Fate die. And they basically said, if you don't have anything else to do, you're probably usually going to want to keep your sixes for to auto succeed, especially if you're playing Ulthway and you have that 6-up invuln, to be able to auto succeed on saving throws. And I think that's right. I really like Goonhammer. I usually agree with like 80% of their analysis. I think they're super level headed and super smart. And oftentimes, you know, when I say I agree with 80%, oftentimes they're right and I'm not too. So let's be clear. I'm not claiming to have some edge on those guys at all. I don't. They're excellent. But I think that's right. I think that the saving throw, when you don't have anything else to do, is the most powerful. And you don't have a 50% chance for that. You have a 1 in 3, right? Because you can make a 5 a 6, but there's nothing above a 6 to make a 6. So on any individual die, except for the advance roll, which is the 1, you're never gonna lean into that. And the 6, which is the saving throw, you have a 50% chance, and then you have a 1 in 3 for the saving throw. And that is an incredibly powerful relic, and it lets you change the way you play the game, because it lets you create a battle plan that depends much more heavily on relying on the Strands of Fate, instead of saying to yourself, I have to remain flexible. I have to put myself in a situation where I can use these dice rolls if I get them. So I have models on the table that can make use of the wound and the hit roll and the saving throw, but I'm not going to plan for it. And this lets you do that. And so Defiant to the Last and the Savior Stone, it's subtle, but it really does give you an opportunity. I think it gives high skill cap players an opportunity to play the game in a different way, to play Craftworld Eldar in a way that's really very competitive. And so that's the trade-off. You don't get a great subfaction bonus, but man, though that relic and that stratagem are just very powerful. Now, although I really do think that those are the standout advantages to Altansar, they do have some other really good stuff going for them. They have a warlord trait called Weaver of the Blade Storm. In your command phase, select one friendly Altansar core unit within 9 inches of this warlord until the start of your next command phase. Each time a model in this unit is selected to make an attack with a shuriken weapon, an unmodified hit roll of 6 automatically wounds the target. Now, there is a far-flung Craftworld trait that does this. It's incredibly powerful. I will say that this does not say and is treated as an unmodified roll of 6 for the purposes of wounding. I really hope that they FAQ that and make it clear, because if you know that you wound the target but you don't get to roll a wound die, you give up on the opportunity to have a better AP result with your dice roll, and that would be kind of a bummer. Assuming that the 6 to wound, I'm sorry, the 6 to hit also is treated as a 6 to wound, then that is really fantastic. Even if it doesn't do that, it would still be really good on Dire Avengers, which have a -2 AP anyway. But the auto wounding on the shuriken catapults, keep in mind that it gives you the opportunity also to use your shuriken catapults on very hard targets. So things that are normally above their pay grade, toughness 6, toughness 7, frankly, even toughness 8 stuff, especially if you also cast guide on them, right? So you're rolling to hit, and all of your 6s auto wound, and then you re-roll some dice, and any additional 6s also auto wound. Suddenly the very high toughness doesn't really matter, and it gives your shuriken units that are probably infantry units that are helping you take objectives, perform actions, control the midfield, are suddenly also a threat to a class of unit that they would never be a threat to. And because Craftworld's units are so expensive now in points, the ability to let a unit essentially multi-class into other kinds of target elimination is actually a very powerful tool. Now, the other 2 warlord traits I think are fine. One, Master of Rune Warding. This lets your warlord attempt to deny 1 additional psychic power. So if it's a psyker, it has an additional deny, and then if it's just, an autarch or something, it can deny. But you want to give this to a Farseer because it also lets you reroll all of your Deny the Witch tests, and that's actually really good. So there are an extra deny is one thing, but being able to reroll all of your denies, especially on a Farseer, which with multiple Deny the Witch rolls, So normally when you try to deny the witch, you're at a disadvantage because if you tie them, you lose. But if you get to roll twice to try to beat their roll, your odds of succeeding significantly higher, right? So whether or not that's a great pick, I think, is going to depend on your local meta. If you're coming up against a lot of armies that rely on powerful psychers, potentially that's really worth taking. Maybe even if you have to pay the CP to take a second warlord trait, that could be really, really good. Tyranids are about to get really good, and we know historically their psychic powers have been a big part of their game. And frankly, just playing against other Craftworld players was not a thing we really had to worry about before. Potentially, that's a really good tool. So I think that one is meta dependent, but is very solid, is very powerful. The last of these, Beacon of Light in the Darkness. This one's pretty good too. I don't see myself necessarily using this a ton, but it's good. It allows a unit within 9 inches of the warlord to perform an action and still make a ranged attack. And it can also perform an action even if it advanced or fell back, right? So again, there a lot of the, if you're leaning into the class of secondaries that requires you to perform actions and you need a unit to be able to multi-class and also do other things, like a small unit of, or even a large unit of Swooping Hawks that's also going to shoot. Potentially, this is very valuable. And there are probably shenanigans also with that ability to advance and perform an action. There's probably something you can do on turn 1 that I haven't really thought about that might be really powerful, especially because many actions can now be performed by bike units. So the ability to ride the wind, get into one of your opponent's table quarters, perform some action, still shoot with that pretty expensive bike unit could be really good. And so if it's part of your battle plan, right, if you know that you're going to score a particular secondary, like on turn 1 in a certain way, I could see this being a valuable tool. And in that sense, I think, again, Altansar is really, if anybody is going to want to take this for competitive games, it's going to be high skill cap players who have sneaky plans. All right, there are 3 more stratagems to talk about and 1 more relic. We'll do the relic first, so then we're just down to stratagems. The relic is called Emblem of the Broken Chain. In your command phase, select 1 friendly Altansar core unit within 6 inches of the bearer, and until the start of your next command phase, you can reroll advance rolls and charge rolls for that unit. It's totally solid. It's fine. It's fine. But the Savior Stone is so good, and there are enough other good relics in the core book that I don't see ever taking that in place of my first. If I'm playing Altansar, obviously I'm taking the Savior Stone. So if I take another relic, I have to pay a CP to do it, and I just don't think it's going to be that one. So I don't see using that one, unless it's part of some plan, very specific plan I haven't thought of. All right, the other 3 stratagems. Inexhaustible Hatred only works against demon units. Add 1 to the wound roll. Obviously, it's 2 CP. Obviously, if you're playing against a demon army, you're going to use that a bunch. It's going to be super powerful, and it only matters against demons. Withering Volleys. This allows you to choose an Altansar unit in your shooting phase armed with some sort of missile launchers, right? So either Aldari missile launchers or Reaper launchers, and improve the armor penetration characteristic by, I shouldn't say missile launchers because it doesn't work on the Tempest launcher, which is a bummer. It's the missile launch, the Aldari missile launcher or the Reaper launcher, and you improve the armor penetration characteristic by 1. That's good. I mean, the Reaper launcher is, I think it's -2, so suddenly it hits a lot harder, and it tends to want to target hard target stuff. The problem is that Dark Reapers aren't very good right now. They're I think they're the only unit in the Codex that just straight up got worse. So Dark Reapers are supposed to be the Altansar thing, but I just don't see you using a lot of Dark Reapers probably in your competitive lists. Honestly, if you're going to use it anywhere, if you had a unit of 3 Warwalkers, all with missile launchers, and they were using the anti-infantry blast profile, that could actually be really solid. But here's the other thing. It's 1 CP if you use it on that unit of 3 Warwalkers, but it's 2 CP if you use it on Dark Reapers, which is like kind of a slap in the face when they're already not awesome. The last strat, again, I don't think Withering Volleys is necessarily a reason to take 3 Warwalkers with launchers, because Warwalkers now can't benefit from Autarch rerolls, and you can't cast Guide on them, and so I don't know that really gets us there, but it's a way to use it. I don't see that one really being a player. The last one, thrice layered ward, is a very useful, very situational tool. It's a single CP, and use the stratagem in your opponent's psychic phase when an Altansar unit from your army would suffer a mortal wound. Until the end of the phase, each time a model in your unit would lose a wound, you roll a d6 on a 4+, the wound is not lost. I would like this better if it were not limited to the psychic phase. I think that wouldn't be totally unreasonable either, given what they've given up in terms of subfaction bonuses. But this, obviously, if something very fragile but very expensive gets targeted by smite, or some army with some equivalent of execution, or also potentially multiple mortal wound dealers, this is a way to give yourself a 4-up feel no pain against mortal wounds. And for something like warp spiders, which are pretty expensive and have good armor but are vulnerable to mortal wounds, or maybe even wraith units, this is because remember the -1 damage for wraith units, it's not going to apply to mortals. This could be situationally very useful. So again, maybe the Altansar wraith cannons may have some additional play. And that's it. That's Craftworld Altansar. So they have such a good relic and such a good stratagem that they really do have play on a competitive table. And the thing that I like about them is that they play differently. I think that those two tools will allow experienced players to run their Craftworld army in a way that they might not otherwise be able to. And I think that's really neat. And I think that's what I would want from a White Dwarf Codex supplement. Nevertheless, I do think there are probably a lot of Altansar players out there who, instead of choosing to use the rules for Altansar, will just lean into far-flung Craftworld, build your own, maybe use Footsteps of the Ancients. These rules they're fun, they're interesting. It's clear that thought went into them. I'm going to give them a solid B. I will definitely try them at the table, but I don't think it's certainly not the equivalent of like the Leviathan Crusher Stampede or some of the other White Dwarf supplements, which have just obviously been standout options for competitive play. That's not where we are. So that's what I've got. I hope to be back soon with another video. I am still recuperating a little bit from making 6 very long videos in 8 days when the new codex dropped. And I have some work to do on the actual website rewriting strategy guides. But I do have some exciting ideas for new content that I think is probably right around the corner. And in the meantime, if you're interested in obtaining early access to videos, the Patreons had early access to this video. You could click the link in the video description to become a Patreon and obtain early access. If you have not liked this video, I hope you will consider clicking like. If you've not yet subscribed to my channel, I hope that you will consider subscribing. And if you have your own ideas about Codex Altansar, or want to point out something stupid that I said or a mistake that I made, you could do that in the comments below, or you could just say hello and help out my algorithm. Thanks, guys. I look forward to talking to all of you again soon. Take care.